He's the pharmaceutical company CEO who achieved a lot of notoriety for hiking the price of a life-saving antiviral drug 5,000%. Now he's being charged with unrelated allegations of securities fraud.
Say what you will, America isn't really free. You piss off the wrong people, they'll find a way to lock you up. In 2015, as a 32-year-old pharma executive, he raised drug prices on a life-saving drug by 5,000% overnight. It might not seem like the thing that leads to a 7-year prison sentence, but in his case, he pissed off the wrong people.
See, there you can answer some questions. That one didn't incriminate you. I just want to make sure you understand you are welcome to answer questions, and not all of your answers are going to subject you to incrimination. You understand that, don't you?
I intend to follow the advice of my counsel, not yours.
The question I keep asking myself is, why are we so oblivious to the greatest offenders just because they're nicely dressed in black suits in tall office? I'm talking about Big Pharma, the insurance companies. Why do we target a self-made man born and raised in the slums of Brooklyn? This is an untold story of Martin Shkreli. It's a rags to riches story. It's a story of redemption and a story of big government and one man that defied it all. On March 17, 1983, Martin Shkreli took his first breath at Coney Island Hospital in Brooklyn. In case you forgot, Brooklyn is not the hip place that it is today. Crime, violence, and crack dealing, that was Brooklyn in the 80s. I guess you could say Shkreli's earliest pharma influence was rooted in the crack epidemic he grew up into. Drugs could be used to destroy entire communities or save lives. In fact, Shkreli became interested in pharmaceuticals after his younger brother suffered from treatment-resistant depression. And as we'll discuss later in the story, Shkreli would use his genius for good. Martin was born to working-class Albanian immigrants pursuing the American dream. They worked day in, day out as janitors. He had big dreams, like every kid that grows up in the ghetto, dreams of something more. But the thing about Shkreli is that he actually had the brains and the courage to actually do it. Maybe others didn't see it that way at the time, but Shkreli had always been different. Just check out his live streams. He'll spend hours showing his research on stocks, then he'll play Fortnite or Slither, study JavaScript, and of course run billion-dollar businesses employing hundreds of people. And as a young, bright kid, of course he was misunderstood. They laughed at him for his dreams. While others saw a joke, he saw a way to get ahead.
I got interested in stocks as a kid, and my friends made fun of me all the time for that. In fact, I remember the kids that made fun of me for caring about the stock market, and I told them that that it would someday would matter, and.
Through hard work and tenacity, he eventually landed his first job at the age of 16 as an intern at a hedge fund with this guy. Yeah, that guy from CNBC. He joined his company Kramer, Berkowitz & Company. And only 7 years later, in 2006, Shkreli would start his first pharma-focused hedge fund, Aliyah Capital. Like most first-time business owners, their first time starting a business may not be successful. And for Shkreli, he shorted the market in a big way, expecting the market to go down. The big short didn't play out, and he quickly found himself buried in debt. His first hedge fund folded, and he would continue working on Wall Street for the next 5 years. His work on finance paid the bills, but ultimately, it wasn't fulfilling. Let's be honest, people that work at hedge funds guess whether prices on a chart will go up or down. That's not anyone's idea of a fulfilling job. His next career would be to create his own pharmaceutical business. To Shkreli, it was not about the money alone. He genuinely wanted to help people like his younger brother that struggled with a critical illness. So in 2011, he built from the ground up a rare disease biotech company called Retrophin. And in 2015, he started another company, Turing Pharmaceuticals. And this would be the company that would later take him down the path of becoming the most hated man in America. The thing about drug development is you need a lot of cash for research. Unlike Big Pharma, Martin didn't have billions of dollars just lying around. So he developed a strategy to get around this, but that would later land him in jail. And here's the thing. He understood that the FDA approves only about 15% of drugs that begin clinical trials, and drug patents are good for 20 years. After 20 years, though, if a drug has enough demand, generic versions are produced by competitors. But what happens when the patent patent expires and there isn't enough demand to justify making a generic version. Medications like that with limited markets start being called orphan drugs. Big Pharma doesn't invest in those drugs because they're not worth waiting 10 to 15 months to get the generic version approved by the FDA. Not only that, the investment needs to provide a return attractive enough to justify the capital investment and the high risk of not being approved. And it's just not there. So Shkreli hatches up kind of a genius plan. All Shkreli needs to do now is to find the right drug with no competition and raise the price to make a shit ton of money. The best thing is that the insurance companies with deep pockets are the ones that foot the bill. Some might see this as savvy, others devious. But honestly, don't blame the player. Before long, Martin found the drug that would make him infamous and piss off the politicians that would end up locking him up. It was called Daraprim. There was only one producer of Daraprim. The big reason it didn't make much money. The drug was priced at $13.50 per pill, and the market was only 2,000 Americans per year. At that rate, of course, you would never see any new competitors. On August 10th, 2015, Turing bought the rights to sell Daraprim in the United States for $55 million. And for those that don't know, Daraprim is a drug used to treat toxoplasmosis, an infection often found in some AIDS patients. And 1 month later, he increased the drug's price from $13.50 a pill to $750, a whopping 5,000% increase. Overnight, he became public enemy number one. But if you step back, this is the reality. He spent $55 million for a drug with a limited market opportunity. Without raising the price, the deal would have never made any sense. And without attractive returns, he could never make additional investments to research and create his own treatments for rare diseases. And here's the thing, the drug would already be covered by most people's insurance. It's not like people were dying on the street because they couldn't afford the drug. In fact, Shkreli would literally give away the drug if people had no insurance and couldn't afford it. The surprising thing is that 5 years later, his actions would be justified and would actually benefit HIV patients struggling from toxoplasmosis. By raising the price, Shkreli created a market for Daraprim. That meant there could actually be competition because it now made economic sense for others. So on February 28th, 2020, the FDA approved the first generic version of Daraprim called Promethamine. He would also push the FDA in 2017 to reduce regulations and loopholes for the generic drug approval process through their Drug Competition Action Plan. But they called him a villain, not knowing then that he was actually the hero we needed, not the one we deserved. This will become clear almost 10 years later. Let's take some time to say something important about Martin. He was ahead of his time, not just in pharma, but as a person. He appeared all over social media, sometimes doing day-long live streams before business figures and other celebrities did the same. He had the courage to be himself in a day and age where social media pressures us to look a certain way, act a certain way, be a certain way. He said things and did things that were authentically Shkreli, even though it might get him in trouble and at times upset people. And my personal favorite thing about Shkreli is he was an early member and moderator of Wall Street Bets. That was the group of everyday people on Main Street that took on Wall Street in early 2021 and actually won. Of course, the world is different now, and a lot of those initial investors are down 90% or more on their portfolios, but even back then, Martin tried to help your everyday investor by providing sound financial advice. He tried to keep people from YOLOing their family's life savings. Had he not been in federal prison at the time, maybe things could have turned out differently for others had he been around to give advice. But
I guess we'll never know.
Back to the story. The headlines were America's most hated man and a pharma bro raises drug prices by 5,000%. But it's no surprise news outlets are in the business of clickbait and selling spicy stories. And the news, of course, always shows a very narrow-minded, one-sided story. However, the part that is left out in this story is that this happened during the 2016 presidential election cycle. And for politicians, why wouldn't you do whatever it takes to get elected? And healthcare is always something on people's minds. But as politicians can't go after the big pharma and insurance industries that actually control healthcare in the United States, they've already donated millions to your campaign. So Shkreli was an easy target. He ran a tiny company and was always saying funny shit on the internet. It was all theater.
Son yelling at me. They wanted to focus, that House committee is not a committee. It's a principal's office. It's for them to look down their nose and to pander to their constituents and not actually solve any problems. If they wanted to say, Mr. Shkreli, what advice do you have for us? How do we stop drug price increases like this?
They called him America's most hated man, and the media made him the poster child for capitalistic greed. On December 17, 2015, 3 months after raising the drug price on Daraprim, he was arrested by the FBI. But not for the reasons you might think. By becoming America's public enemy, the authorities were ready to uncover any wrongdoing from Shkreli's past. They turned over every stone. And it's clear, he would have never been investigated had it not been for bringing attention to himself for raising the price on Daraprim.
The company that makes the life-saving drug Daraprim has increased the price for one tablet by 5,000%.
They were looking for something to hold him down, to cripple his future and destroy him once and for all. They had to look back 4 years to find something to pin against him. They charged him with securities fraud related to the MSMB hedge funds and pharma company Retrofin he operated. The 8 counts would have locked him up for 40 years. In the end, Shkreli wasn't totally honest, and he made some mistakes as a 20-something-year-old living in New York City.
Yeah, so I went to jail for fraud.
As Shkreli described, he had exaggerated how much money his hedge fund had and how well the performance had been. At one point, he had misled investors, telling them he managed $100 million when the funds in the account were actually negative 33 cents. That honestly sounds like something Shkreli would do. That's kind of funny, but that's what ultimately put him in jail. But the interesting thing about this story is that it was a criminal case against Martin by the US government. It's not like the investors who had been misled were after Shkreli. This wasn't a blatant Ponzi scheme or anything like that. In fact, his investors made 3 to 5 times their money. So okay, fine, he misled investors and they made 5 times their money. Not a bad outcome at all for them. This sentence should have been light, right? No one was hurt. Shkreli and his lawyers were expecting 1 to 2 years in prison. They sentenced him to 7. He was not charged for what most people hated him for. They never cared about the drug prices. They just didn't want Shkreli around the pharmaceutical industry anymore. And the authorities almost got what they wanted. They wanted to take him to jail, but he was granted bail at $5 million. But the story wouldn't be interesting if he never committed another fuck-up. He tweeted that he would offer a sum of $5,000 for a strand of Hillary Clinton's golden hair. So on September 13, 2017, they revoked his bail, claiming he was instigating assault. Shkreli was finally locked up. On March 9, 2018, he was sentenced to 7 years in prison and ordered to pay $8 million. His problems didn't end there, though. While in prison on January 14, 2022, he was banned from the pharmaceutical industry for the rest of his life by a federal judge. He and his company were also ordered to return the $64 million of profit he made from Daraprim. The moral of the story is don't mess with the US government. They are the original gangsters and will shake you down for all you got. The beautiful thing is that as the years went by in the penitentiary, as they do, Shkreli still showed love to his fans. He didn't stop giving back to the community of degens that stood by him. He continued to stay close to the community while in prison. Shkreli was released from prison and sent to home confinement in summer of 2022, and he was released from confinement on September 14th. And just 2 months out of prison, he created a new software that helps anyone model compounds for drug development, and he's back to streaming his life on YouTube, where he has been welcomed back as a hero by his army of degenerates. Shkreli's full story is yet to be told. I'm sure there's much more in the store for his future. I know he's working on some stuff in AI and probably a host of other things that I'm not aware of. But for now, we'll just have to follow along on his road to redemption. The Wolfpack will be rooting for you. I'll be rooting for you.